have heard this morning how sovereign cloud has evolved from a policy-driven concern to a spectrum of practical models and how these models are now being implemented in real-world environments. Building on that, what we are seeing is now a shift from defining sovereignty in principle to operationalizing it in practice. And that raises a number of important questions for the next phase of Europe's digital infrastructure development. As sovereign cloud approaches become more widely adopted across member states and sectors, questions remain around how these models are going to be defined, certified, and compared, and how Europe can ensure consistency while still enabling innovation and growth. Our next panel will explore how Europe can develop a more coherent approach to cloud sovereignty and what is needed to avoid unnecessary fragmentation as these models move from early adoption to a wider development now. To moderate this panel discussion, please welcome Ilias Chanchos, Chief Privacy Officer at Broadcom. Joining him on stage, I am now calling Andrea Gulacci, Director Policy and External Affairs at CEN and Senelec. Andrea, welcome. Ronald Bezur, Chief Executive Officer and Founder at Uniserver.
Very nice to meet you. Please.
Ingo Kraupa, Co-Founder and Chief Executive Officer at Norris Network. And Larik Jan Verschuren Parchomov, Chief Technology Officer at Fundaments.
Good to see you.
Ladies and gentlemen, enjoy the conversation.
Yeah, thank you. Hi. So, ladies and gentlemen, a very good morning to all of you, and thank you for being here with us today. I thought the previous presentations were actually quite inspiring, also in terms of telling us, describing accurately the challenges that we're facing when it comes to what about sovereignty washing, and what is that we need to be thinking about when expecting, and now even more so when looking the regulatory proposals that are on the table. Being in Brussels and talking a lot about regulation, if I had to describe this panel in terms of food, this is the filet mignon panel. This is where we're discussing, really sovereignty versus regulation versus practical implementation. So I'm very delighted to have with me people representing different parts of this discussion, with Andrea Gulacci, who is the Director of Policy and External Affairs at Senelec, where she sits at the intersection of standardization policy and arguably can tell us a lot about the harmonization discussion. But then on my left-hand side, I've got really captains of the industry. So I've got Ronald Bezur, who is the CEO and founder of Uniserver, that brings the perspective of European infrastructure provider. I've got Ingo Kraupa, who is the co-founder and CEO of Norris Networks, one of Germany's leading sovereign cloud providers, and Larik Jan Verschuren Parchomov, who is the CTO of Fundamentals, a Dutch sovereign cloud provider, bringing a builder's perspective on this discussion. So between them, we've got standard bodies, cloud, infrastructure, the kind of players that bring in this large-scale transformation. So I don't want long monologues, not like mine, certainly. I want short and snappy discussion, and I would encourage them also, if they have something to disagree about, that they do it, because without any disagreements, the panel is not sportive enough. So I'll just dive into the questions, and let's begin from the end. Larik?
Yes.
Many of you operate in different European markets, right, with different regulatory environments. Can you tell us where you're based, and then the kind of sectors you serve, and how this regulatory landscape, this divergence is shaping the sovereign cloud discussion for you?
Yeah, definitely. So Fundaments is a CSP
cloud service provider from operating in the Dutch market. So we provide cloud infrastructure from the Netherlands, and we work with a partner ecosystem to provide services to companies that actually want to know what's going on with their data. Your question is what's going on? I think the whole market has awoken about, okay, my data is very important, and we need to do something with it. We serve healthcare, local government, and they are really thinking about, okay, what should we do with our data, how to protect it in the best way.
Okay. Yeah. This is the demand, right? Our data, we need to protect it in a better way. They are important. What about how the market is, let's say, is it a market that, is this across the board, and is it a market that allows you to scale? So to put it differently, can you deliver the same service that you're delivering in the Netherlands easily in other jurisdictions? Can you move, can you scale your offering across the board? And is it the same requirement that you see in each member state? So you've got the European, the German customer saying, my data is important, the French customer agreeing, my data is also important, and then you come and say, and I can serve you both.
Yeah, if I look at my perspective, I think on the technology part, we can scale. But when I would serve as a Dutch company, for example, I would like to have a German hospital as a customer. They have their own standards. For example, the BSI C5. In the Netherlands, we have our own framework of certifications, of ISO standards that we should comply. So the only way to do that is to become a BSI C5 standardized company. And I think in this part, I don't think that we're even that less good as my German competitors in that way. But the way that everything is locked on specific certification standards makes it less scalable for me on a regulatory part, not even on the technology part.
Ingo, Roland, any thoughts on this?
Well, he's absolutely right. There are too many standards in the different countries if you want to operate like more internationally, I guess, because we operate in Germany and we focus on Germany. Maybe it's for the same reason, yeah. I don't even know exactly. It's like a bit of a hurdle to get into different markets. But Europe is not that big, so maybe you have to think about that and harmonize all these standards and make it easier for all of us. And so we can bring more focus on the services we offer, bring it to a broader audience, and maybe you can profit all of it.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, that, but I also maybe true, and I also think that we have in Europe also the culture issue, I think, between countries, also delivering services and as a client that you may want to discuss in your own language. But also I think Europe needs to maybe a bit more consolidation on the market. I think in the last few years there are way too many providers as well, small ones. So we're currently seeing that there's consolidation to be, well, having the scale to operate more in Europe. So I think that's besides the regulation also, and then, well, a subject to address, I think.
Okay, so a few key themes actually. Technology is there, consolidation, market size, focus, and the regulatory sort of like divergence, if I can go the standards divergence. So I'll turn to the standards lady. Andrea, I mean, there's a growing expression of concern, and certainly this has been an argument that we've heard from the policymakers around sovereignty washing, right? Claims that something is sovereign, and how do you demonstrate those credentials? How do you avoid marketing speak, quite frankly, on one side, and on the other side, how do you make sure that you create that, if not flat, perhaps more even or more consolidated playing field around standards so that we can compare apples to apples when it comes to particular service?
No, indeed. Thank you, Elias. And I think just to bounce back on what you're mentioning, I think here we're very much in a case where technology has advanced very fast. and standardization
As it
is trying
usually
to
does,
catch
by
up.
the way.
And that's why you mentioned these different standards that are, and I think Uwe Geier was already referring now to the BSI standards, ISO standards. So I think where we are now is we need to bring all these standards together to create this level playing field across Europe. And the standardization role is really to translate policy into very operational, technological, comparable framework, like you say, comparing apples to apples. And that's where we have, I think, the asset of standardization, because you were mentioning, sovereignty washing, is that it gives a certain degree of trust. We have all the actors around the table, not only the technology providers, but also those benefiting from the technology, maybe the lawmakers as well. So everybody that is affected by cloud sovereignty would be in a technical committee. And then working together, providing a framework that everybody has an understanding about, can compare it from the Netherlands to Germany. So when we enter procurement, there is a certain safety and a certain, addressing certain trustworthy aspects, I think is where standardization has a role to play. And that's where we are now developing as well standards at the European level, closely linked, of course, to the international as well, because we know that technology is not only Europe-bound or country-bound, so we are looking as well at aligning internationally.
Can I play it a little bit difficult for a moment? You said we bring everyone around the table, but that makes it inherently slower, doesn't it? I mean, again, reminiscent of my times, 25 years ago, when I was in the Commission, and we had 15 member states, not 27.
Indeed.
So, yeah, decision was faster. So, and you spoke about the speed of technology, right? So.
No, fair enough. And I think, to add to the 27, Senate have 34 members. So we are looking, and I think Turkey was mentioned earlier. So we are looking really at the European framework. Yes, standardization can be slow. It depends very much on the commitment and investment of our experts around the table to make it faster. I think, okay, we would enter technicalities when I mentioned we have different type of standards that provide faster market solutions. So we're not always looking necessarily at a full, very long process. So we also need to match technology. And I think that's something that we have learned. You were mentioning as well, the Commission experience you had. We've learned as well as standardization organizations, we do need to move a lot faster. Our processes need to be speedier, more digital, more automatized. So that's something we have taken on board to address, particularly in very fast-moving technological areas.
AI, right?
Exactly. We have AI, we have cyber, we have data, and where we also want to see Europe playing a leading role. And with that goes the speed of standards. And I think that's something we're addressing. There's still room for improvement, but we're addressing.
So, question to the whole panel. Some member states are defining sovereignty or are pursuing sovereignty on the basis around nationality and ownership. Others feel that the discussion needs to be much more focused around operational, auditable controls, residency, jurisdiction. Where do you draw the line? Where do you think the right balance is on the sovereignty discussion? Feel free.
Yeah, I think it's not an either or. You need both, of course. But fundamentally, it's necessary that that you really know that the legislation is you know what legislation works for this offering. So if data can be lost, if data can be taken, and it's an important data, that's a must-have, that it's secured. Concerning to the other governance things, like where do the people work, or what kind of locality is it? Are there any parts of the offering that are not extremely local? I think that is something you can agree on, or you can design in a different case. But fundamentally, it's necessary the legislation must be.
Yeah, I think it makes clear for clients to know if they choose the right decision to go forward, especially if you go to a specific cloud, you don't do that for a few months, you go that for the next 3-5 years. But I think in my personal opinion, it's all about continuity and being in control on your own destiny as a company and on your own data. And well, the whole regulation, especially in the CADA, I think it's a good step forward. But what we've been seeing the last few months is that also what Larry was mentioning, we see the public sector in the Netherlands got awake on the whole part what happened in the last few months. So that's
more sensitive.
more sensitive or more about, okay, how are we securing that we are still independent and continue our data or mission critical applications. So.
But you should not put up more and more and more barriers.
Yeah.
That's something that's really like, we always have no regulation and more things we need to protect ourselves, and I have a feeling that it might be too much, and then in the end it helps nobody. So you have to be very careful. Maybe you make it the other way around. You don't regulate too much, but you reward if somebody plays the right game. You know what I mean? You really look into it, and there are rewards for people playing it right, whatever.
I see Andrea wants to say something. I think Larry wants to say something.
No, it's just to add to
Go on.
the fact that, and I think we need to make that distinction between regulation and standardization, which is a harmonization component. And I think that's where standardization can come in, because it respects the national differences. You're mentioning different cultures, but it sets a baseline that everybody can find itself into the market. Because I think we're looking at a technology and a technology offering that is not only framed around the country borders, but if you have clients from another country, they should be able to make that reference. And I think that's where we see this national legislations, if they are creating those boundaries and borders, that's where European legislation, supported by standards, so a level playing field, can create an actual scale-up of the market.
Yeah, maybe also to add to that, when I'm talking to customers and we talk about sovereign cloud, the past year it's been very different on what the definitions are. It's jurisdiction. Are you a Dutch company? That would be enough. Right?
It's not localization anymore, right?
Not
I mean, to put
anymore,
it very
no.
bluntly, it's
No.
about operational, jurisdictional, technological control.
Yeah.
Please.
So in the end, for me, when you talk about sovereign cloud, it's all about controlling your data. It can be on technology, but also on people and process. And you have to put that in the mix. And maybe to add some positive, I'm quite fan of the new European sovereign cloud framework, because you have some measurability.
You're talking the digit framework, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
So the levels of the seal scores.
Seal score.
And we see it now in tenders and RFPs coming in that the requester is asking to you have a specific seal score, so you can at least measure your sovereignty on that one. So that's good to have this standardization. So you talk about the same definition in the end.
So just to sort of continue that train of thoughts, but you see it as a scaling exercise, right? You don't see it as you're either sovereign or you're not sovereign. You see it as what's the level of, I say that because this is by definition the digit design, right?
Yeah. In the end you have to talk about the same definition. So you need some explanation by it. And that's the thing, because we also used to talk about cloud. Yeah, if I talk to a cloud, what's your cloud? It can be something that's running at your on-prem enterprise, but it's also can something that's in a hyperscaler, And with sovereign cloud, it's the same. So we need to have a definition that's what we're talking about. And what is it?
So is the CADA definition the right definition? What do you think?
I think it's a meaningful step in the right way. I think there's a lot of steps to be taken if you go to the practical world of it. But I think it's a good way to at least have the discussion quite clear about what you're talking about.
You've got something to chew on, right?
Yeah,
definitely.
some guidance.
Yeah, that's it. It sets the frame.
That's good for the market and all the clients in Europe, I think.
And I think then just to bounce back, because one is the frame, and then indeed experts agreeing on what this means for us, and are we talking about the same thing? And I think that's where historically it's been the backbone of standardization in fields where there are these different understandings or a different interpretation. It's the terminology, the definitions, so that we all talk about the same thing. And then you build on that, what it means what services you provide, I don't know, the safety aspect of it, security aspect.
No, I'm smiling because I'm thinking the negotiation in a council, for example, everyone's arguing every negotiation.
Every word.
And any comma on the sort of like on how the definition is going to look like, which by the way, I mean, that's the EU democratic process. That's how it's working. So to sort of like try to delve in a bit into the definition discussion, one of the biggest challenges will surely be the discussion around strategic dependencies on foreign providers. So how realistic do you think it is to manage that dependency short term, longer term? Is a level 4 basically no foreign dependencies, everything open source, even realistic?
Well, on the technically part, maybe it is, but on operational part, well, I find it quite difficult if you take a look of where all the technology and innovation comes from, especially if you look at AI at this time. But for me, it's more a whole risk management process about are you going 100% sovereign or 20% or 0%? So it's a real risk management on the applications or the data you are trying to serve. And if the data isn't that mission critical, why should it be a level 4? It shouldn't. So it's not a 0 or 1. It's not true or false. It's between. I think.
Is it even affordable?
Sorry?
Is it even affordable? Can you pay for it?
Well, maybe it is, but I think the most difficult part is timing. I think what we are lacking in Europe is execution power. If you take a look at America and China, they are way ahead. So we can focus on regulation and building our own stuff, but then you are 3 or 5 years behind, and then, well, we all know how fast technology is going now, so we also have the difficulty or the challenge of speed and execution power here in Europe. So, to answer your question, no, I don't think so. To be fully level 4, if it's affordable or doable, I don't think it's the way forward for how I see it.
Yeah, I think I agree. It's not doable, level 4. From a perspective where you want to have the full control on the software that's running, I think that's a great idea. It's a great thing to strive on. But in the end, there's also other things coming into the discussion. We want to move forward. Somewhere you don't want to use, for example, open source tooling that you have to evaluate or make it to a certain level that maybe closed source software already is. Yeah? So in terms of going forward and also be competitive in a geopolitical scale, I think there it will be challenging. And in the end,
yeah. I think it depends on the offering. If it's a complex project and lots of applications and sourcing everywhere, it might be very complicated. If it's like in a very specialized AI case, like picture processing or whatever, and you have a local platform and all the software is more or less open source, there are open models in place, well, it could be level 4 easily, I guess. So it depends.
It's interesting because there's the technological discussion, and then there's the economics discussion, the competitiveness discussion. So to shift gears a bit to go into the competitiveness, and I'm looking at the captains of the industry. So the stated objective of European policy is, on one hand, certainly of industrial policy, is on one hand to create the local market ecosystem, okay, and to strengthen it, and on the other hand, to capture more market, right, to basically compete with the hyperscalers more effectively. So I guess, is this sovereignty discussion driving business growth for you? Are you winning customers? And in your view, what is the driving force behind the customer demand for sovereignty? Is it the regulation? You spoke about the realization, my data is valuable. Why didn't we know it before? Is it because we realized it because people are afraid of kill switches or because they're afraid that the data might be lost. I mean, again, wearing the privacy officer's hat, we've had GDPR now for 10 years. If we still don't know that our data are valuable, we're doing something wrong, right? So what's driving this and what does this mean for your business?
Yeah, well, we've been seeing in the Netherlands quite some hospitals and governments who's, some switched some applications and some said, well, we are going 100% in the next 2-3 years to a sovereign solution or a Europe-based infrastructure. A good question what you said, what changed? Well, I think what changed the last year and 1.5, I think with the new Trump administration, everybody sees with Greenland and politics, see that 2 weeks ago, he will do an export ban on technology. And I think all the years before that, well, I think everyone thought, well, not going to happen. So I think that switched a mindset with a lot of, people, and especially the directors or people who make the decisions at companies. Mm-hmm. That's my personal opinion.
Well, during the last decade or even longer, we've seen a massive shift from workloads to the hyperscalers. I mean, the hyperscalers, they have a fantastic offering. They built a huge, enormous worldwide platform. And if you have a need for a worldwide scalable platform, it's best for you to go to hyperscale, I would say, unless you're as big that you can build up your own hyperscale platform. But that's not a need for everybody, you know. I mean, there are a lot of companies that don't have a global and international footprint. So this is one thing they don't need. And maybe they have a more local approach. They want to talk in the language they know. They want to make decisions they understand with people they trust. And this has been true even for the last 10 years. We always won projects over the last 10 years against hyperscalers, so also we lose some. But there is a niche and a market for local sovereign providers, and the actual discussion is, of course, pretty good for providers like us because it shifts the focus back. I mean, you had the saying, you never get fired when you buy IBM, right? It's an old saying, and now it used to be like we have a hyperscaler strategy. It's a global strategy, hyperscale first, cloud first. All the big companies, they tell you, they advise you go to the hyperscaler. It's the way to do. If you don't go, you will be left behind. You will be far, far left behind. And now, if you look at it closely, you see, well, that's not the whole truth. That may be truth for some of the cases, but not for all cases. And there are some cases that are way more expensive than they need to be. They lack of the brilliance and the effectiveness they had. So it's not good for everything. Not one size fits it all. Okay. To be.
I think you also have. I mean, because you were mentioning China and the US. I think it's also a cultural thing. No, I mean, I think Europe is more risk averse, and here we do tend to have the more policy discussion. Let's make sure the frame is secure, and then deploy technology. We have other regions of the world where the investment and the deployment of technology goes a lot faster, with its drawbacks as well. So I'm not saying that. What we try to do then in terms of standardization, because you were mentioning the US and China, we try to bring them at the standardization table together with Europe at the international level, so that we don't start seeing geopolitics fragmenting the market in itself. So I think the ISO standard was mentioned as well. That's a very good example of where we need to play our role as Europeans at the table internationally, but that's where we have our counterparts as well, from China, from the US, and work together on that. So I think that's a soft power that standardization has that we should also make sure that we leverage in this debate.
So you see us the man in the middle, kind of like, or woman in the middle, like on the standardization discussion. Larry?
Yeah, maybe also on the previous question, geopolitics are definitely driving the demand for sovereign cloud. I think we can all agree on that one. But I think there's another thing that's also driving this, and that's AI. We are now in a phase that everybody's playing around with it, and now we are putting it into production. But well, then it's really gets scary, because now I'm putting my company data to the AI. And then the question comes, how do we control that one? Who's handling it? Is it data going through US API where you send the data, or do we want to do it ourselves? And that's a little thing. Also in that play where I see a lot of demand coming, but I really want to have this control on the data that's going on there. So yeah.
It's interesting because I systematically say when having this discussion that in Europe we don't have an innovation problem, okay? We have an economics problem in terms of growth, scale, and sort of like how do we want to manage the business, right? Because is it the market big enough? Is it the right strategy, the right focus in what it is that we're pursuing? How do we compete with our international partners and friends in that global market? So, and you hit the nail on the head on the next wave is AI. So, what does AI mean from a growth opportunity for sovereign cloud? I guess the one hand, and how is technology? And okay, I'll ask also, how is VMware technology helping you when it comes to your ability to innovate and to compete on price and quality?
I think.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, I think it's the number one request that we get in the AI play. But the thing is, being a CSP, a cloud service provider, we want to have a templated version of our offering, else you cannot copy paste. And what we see is that every case now coming in is different, so it's always a special. So that's a little bit challenging. But I think in the end, it will emerge to a templated version. The second part,
I was asking. I zoomed for a moment also on the VMware side.
Oh yeah, the VMware side. Yeah, I think what VMware is doing for us is providing a modern private cloud offering. It was everybody knows VMware as like the hypervisor, and nowadays it's a complete package where it's technology, one hand, but also giving you the auditability, the process that's needed for to show you that you're in control on your cloud. So I think it's evolved to a complete stack, but also is looking at the process things of.
For us, is that the same? Because if you want to build if you want to build an Azure, for example, or build an open source, then you need a lot of engineers, a lot of VC power. What's in Silicon Valley all available, in Europe less. So for us, using VCF or Broadcom, it's already, like Lark mentioned, a really modern cloud infrastructure suite of all the products, which gives us the execution and time to market to offer sovereign solutions to our customers. So, and that's has more value than building or creating our own technology with open source and engineers, etc. And also, especially with all the, we all read the mythos AI, and if you build an open source and you have 100 engineers, we don't have those 5,000, 10,000 engineers like Broadcom has, who can patch and update everything as quickly as with the current AI models, with all the security bugs, and what also will be in the future problem, I think, for open source as well.
So speed, reliability, resilience, if you like, and a standardized platform.
Yeah, because that delivers more value to the customer than building.
That enables you to innovate.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and someone to call if there's a critical patch instead of hoping the community will solve it, for example, for it.
Well, speed in AI is so dramatically improving and still improving. It's incredible. You can't keep up. I mean, this is the year 2006 that we changed from play around with AI to it works for us. It is agentic. It makes things happen. And it totally changes the way we as a service provider work. So we used to work like totally different than we work now. And it will change over the next months and years. And it's really fantastic because we shifted in our history, we shifted a lot of time the way what we do, what we work, but it's so massive with AI that you can't really tell where this ends. You don't know how many people you need in the end, It's hard for planning. Maybe You can do the same thing much better with less people. Maybe you need more people because you have you need to set up things that work, and you need to be the first in a matter of timing. It's a really interesting time right now, I think.
Agreed. And frankly, if you see what's going on the public policy side, I mean, the AI Act, the omnibus on the AI Act, there's also, you see also that level of discussion about, do we have the right framework? Do we need to change the framework slightly? Are we ready for it? Do we need more? Do we need less? So there's definitely truth on that, also on the regulatory debate. Andrea, we spoke a lot about, where the market is. I guess there's, what is often said in this town is that there's a gap between where the market is and where the regulation is, and what the regulation aspires to and what the market can practically deliver. So, and I say that certainly as someone who has seen EU regulatory work being produced, and then all of us eagerly looking for the standardization and all the debate around the standardization that needs to happen. So where do you see the biggest friction, especially now that we are not talking just about a regulation, but that will demand behavior X, Y, Z, but a regulation that also wants ultimately to force a certain procurement behavior, for example?
Yeah, no, fair enough. I think it's the challenge, but also the gap. And I think that's where we're now at the intersection of all these acts, as you mentioned. And we need to make them work together. And I think that's where we see standardization having a challenging job to deliver. Also because, I mean, you're all speaking from a technology provider, service provider, but we also have the service buyers who need to, which are interlinked with our European values and culture, no? Of safety, of trust, of making sure my data is secure, making sure, it doesn't end up in the wrong hands. How can I compare the procurement part of it as well? So I think that's where standardization is trying to address those challenges. I think where we see the biggest I would say point for improvement from a standardization regulator perspective is to have those discussions much sooner before the regulation comes out. I think we're all faced...
Even if we don't agree on the definition?
Even if we don't agree on the definitions, but maybe it's better to not agree on the definitions before they're put out in regulation, because then we need to interpret them, we need to translate them. That adds to the time it takes to come to a consensus, to a conclusion. So from a standardization perspective, our strongest call at the moment to the regulators is, please let's have those discussions up front. I mean, we represent and enable the platform of industry, of technology providers, of technology users, consumers. So let's have those discussions before the text comes out, because then we do a lot of backtracking on text, which takes a lot of time, a lot of lobbying, a lot of discussions, a lot of also, I would say, tension points between, we receive, of course, standardization requests from the European Commission. Some of them are implementable, some are not, and that just adds to the clock. That's ticking, and I think that's where we have a job to do, basically, to have that earlier engagement so that we align before the text comes out and before we translate it into practical operational solutions.
You speak about adding and clocks ticking and standardization, and I think CRA, but
Yes,
we'll table that one. This is the wrong panel. We're not going to discuss that here. But so if and this is a question to the whole to the whole panel, because I want also to open the floor for questions. If we were, and please look at your crystal ball, your Palantir, whatever you want to look at, if we were to Palantir in the Lord of the Rings kind of sense. So if we were to ask you to, not if we were, the question is, how do you think European sovereignty needs to look like? What would be your end goal? What would be your ideal state 3 years, 6 years from now? So let's look medium term and long term. So what do you think, how do you think sovereignty needs to be looking like short term and longer term, especially to call this a success, frankly?
I think short term, I think we have to look at harmonization on standards that we have in each country, so that you could, for example, if I would have a diploma from my university, it's also recognized in another member state in a way that we can do that. I think that's doable in short time. And for the mid and longer term, I think we really have to look at what we are trying to aim. I think it should be more about data control than discussion about supply chain. In the end, you want to have to be transparent about how data is being protected. So I think we have to shift a little bit the discussion to look at that part instead of specific, well, for example, in CADA, the whole software supply chain there. That would be my thought.
I agree with Larek on the diploma part, but also I think on the procurement level in Europe, I think practice what you preach maybe, especially at the public sector or some mission critical infrastructure which really needs to be sovereign to enhance or help the industry to make it sovereign. I hope in the next 3 to 5 years.
I think you chose exactly the timeline that a standard takes to be developed, which is 3 years. Not 6 years, 3 years. I think from a standardization perspective, respecting the national differences, I think ideal case scenario would be a harmonized level playing field in Europe, and then take that at the international level so that we do have that alignment with the international standards that are in the sector, and then increasingly so work together across the different sectors, because at the moment we're still dealing cyber, AI, data, cloud, so it's trying to bring all these different actors to work together on integrated standards.
So we're going to have an integrated standard for digital of everything, but not the regulation, not the
and then in our terminology, they're called joint technical committees across SENS, Senelec, and ETSI, which is in the room as well. So it's to have that kind of integrated approach at the European level.
Ingo, your Valhalla for European cloud?
Well, I think, and we see some examples actually. I think that we will see a lot more entrepreneurs and companies going or investing in that field, being sovereign, having local providers, establishing a completely new market, and don't be afraid to attack like the big global hyperscalers. That's what I hope that we will see in the next few years, and hopefully in the far future they are very successful.
Okay, so you actually see, growth and organic innovation and growth in Europe.
I see small companies, I see big companies that invest in sovereignty.
That's very interesting also in the context of the Draghi report, right? Because that's one of the key requirements around that. So, ladies and gentlemen, I think this is now, we're almost 15 minutes to the end of our panel, so I think this is a good moment to ask questions. So, I was about to go in ancient Greek and go, "Tis agorevin vulete." Who would like to take the floor? The chair recognizes the gentleman at the front, and I see there's another gentleman as well on our left. So if we could have the mic, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Good morning, everybody. Rahul Nasir from IDC. A fascinating discussion. I wanted to ask a question, maybe targeting you first, Andrea, if I may. Increasingly, since GDPR, when GDPR came out, there wasn't a great deal of sovereignty mentioned during that. And then as we've seen regulations come into the EU, more and more that word sovereignty has started creeping into the discussions. Is that Europe's real solution? Let's legislate our way out of all this, because David was talking about how the Trump administration is using cloud and weaponizing it. Can we weaponize compliance, for example? What's your reaction to that?
No, thank you. I keep on making this disclaimer. We're not the regulators. So,
The standards body.
so we're the standards body.
No, I understand.
But it's a very fair question. Absolutely a very fair question. And it's something that we have, we're trying to translate as well. What does that mean? Because as European Standards Organization, our principles are really international first, because that's where the industry and the stakeholders that come to standardization want to see global solutions. But we do recognize that there are some European specificities which translate in this European sovereignty across different sectors and fields. And it's not only in the technological side, where we need to address European specific aspects in standardization. So it's a very fine line between one global solution, which is what we strive for with ISO, with IEC, and then seeing if that global standard needs to have its own annexes, adapted parts of it to respond to the European sovereignty questions, if that answers your question. But for us, it's very much, it's a point of continuous discussion with the regulators. What does this mean? And why are we looking, because it's been a shift from a open Europe everywhere to a more sovereign Europe, one team, one Europe. So it's also this shift that we have seen in terms of policy making, and for us to see what role standards can play in that through the frame that we have in Europe.
Go on.
Just very quick. No, I asked you because I thought you might be closer to what you're hearing whispered about in the corridors of power in Brussels, and that's why I thought, what is the mood music like as far as that?
I would like to comment on something about the GDPR, but
No, of course, please do.
So I would very respectfully, I would dispute the assumption that sovereignty was disconnected from the GDPR discussion. Perhaps it was called differently, perhaps it was called equivalence, but at its core, by design, the GDPR was doing two things. Number one, it was enabling the free flow of personal data intra-EU, okay? So you were in the UK, someone was in Bulgaria, they could exchange data and there was no discussion as to whether the same level of protection was applicable. And in contrast, the GDPR was regulating under what conditions, meaning what is the level of protection that there needs to be for the data to leave the European Union and go to a third country. By regulating the conditions with which you can export the data, you also create the framework mechanism to refuse that export. And that's where we have seen that happening in European Court of Justice decisions, for example, that took down Privacy Shield and Safe Harbor. So, whereas GDPR was, so if we understand the discussion around sovereignty as our ability to deny access or to deny export of information, the GDPR has been used for that. However, I'm not discussing whether it was for the right reasons or the wrong reasons, right? I'm just describing the facts, at least as I see them. However, the discussion, I think, has moved considerably past beyond the jurisdictional control, for example, or the pure localization when we're debating sovereignty now. In that sense, I would say that it's even much more sophisticated, the discussion today, because it goes further than just where's my data and how do they flow and are they adequately protected, along to cover a lot of other risks, including an economic dimension, which was never in the context of the GDPR. Make sense? You wanted to say something, so, and yes, I haven't lost sight. So,
no, that's fine, I'm not going to hog the microphone. Interesting points, didn't answer the question.
Yeah.
Fine.
But I think just to come to the corridors of power, I think we are also talking about competitiveness of Europe, and can that be delivered through sovereignty? And I think that's where all the elements need to come together, but for me and for standardization point of view, not disconnected with what happens around the world.
And my goal was not to answer her question. My goal was to explain the GDPR, okay?
Very complimentary.
Absolutely. The chair recognizes.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
My name is Björn Håkansson from TNO in the Netherlands. I think we hear a lot of discussions about, general observations in the market and what other parties should do, etc. But I would like to take the opportunity to ask the representatives on the industry, what are you doing, what have you been doing in the past years yourselves in relation to sovereignty? And what do you see yourselves be doing the coming year in that area of sovereignty?
Good question. Well, we've been running, or with 6 other members, we started the Open Cloud Alliance in the Netherlands, where we as competitors combine together to address the public sector and well, making an open framework and making more the sovereignty discussion available to the public sector as well. So that's quite well, doing quite well, and we get some traction a lot on that, especially in the Netherlands. So that's what we're doing in the Netherlands.
Yeah, well, we developed with others on the sovereign cloud stack, and we continued to have an operating model which is totally sovereign for our customers. And now we want to approach, get in the new CADA requirements and show the level to the customers what they can expect.
Yeah, for us, we're in a local community where you talk to your peers about this topic as well. And in the end, for us, it's making the transparency to our customers, our potential customers, what we are doing on sovereignty. So taking, for example, the sovereign cloud framework and explain how we do things. So it's more on, from our vision, how we look at it.
There was a question there. Thank you. And we've got one more at the back. And then for reasons of fairness, I'll take also one question from the online. Please.
Yeah, Ignacio Guardans, Sciences Po in Paris. You all mentioned, and it was mentioned at the beginning, that AI is pushing the cloud development. So the connection between both is clear, and you as representatives of the industry, you mentioned that very clearly. Now, AI has its own regulatory and governance debates going on, very important, developing, taking place about governance, about sovereignty is not the word used there, liabilities, essentially. I say hosting, I mean, liability related to hosting, all that. So my question to you would be, to what extent do you believe that those debates will be polluting, if I can use that word, your own debates? So how are those two vases communicating, the AI governance debate and the cloud governance debate? How do you see them? And precisely to you as industry, not as lawyers. This is not a question for lawyers. It's a question for you as those who are going to suffer that.
Well, I would say the AI is on top of the cloud sovereignty, so it's a different level because AI manages all of it and sits on top of it and can make use of the underground cloud infrastructure. And I really don't know how the governance can be established here in the near future with AI. I don't see it still. I'm watching it.
Yeah. If you ask me, then I think they're separate. If you look at the AI discussion, where's the model coming from? How it's been trained? What are the guardrails? It's a separate discussion on. If you look at cloud, for us, an AI or using AI, it consists of two things: the model itself. So that's in the first discussion. But the other thing is the data of the customer that's being processed through the AI model. Then you get your value. So there's an intersect in a way. And if you have the model discussion clear, then I think the data, you can connect it quite easily in a way. So.
Yeah, I agree on that, because the data is, you can see it as a cloud infrastructure legalization, because that's the data still on the service which you use, but the LLM model, the model you're training, that's a different part and a new part what's been discussing. And well, future will tell, but I hope we in Europe get some great models like Mistral and even better, but the data still resides on the infrastructure, on the customer, so I think that's.
Absolutely, and one idea is to put a framework around AI again, like a firewall on AI, and the other thing is And I think maybe both will happen. The other idea is to have smaller models with less intelligence for the right task, so that the model can't do stuff that it shouldn't do.
There was a question at the back.
Hello, my name is Benjamin. I'm Cycloid founder. Nice to meet you. I have a question for you, Andrea. Andres or Andrea?
Andrea.
Which kind of event would you need to stop using infrastructures and software which are US? It's a kind of simple question.
From
What would be the catalyst?
from a standardization perspective.
Like from everything, right? Like just stop using infrastructures and US software.
US. I think from a standardization perspective, we wouldn't have that power across Europe to do that, because again, that falls into the regulators' side. So I think that would be a regulation that we would need to enforce. I think here the question will come as well, purely from a technological industrial perspective. Do we want to have a locked-in approach to whichever technology, cloud technology, and lock in providers from other countries? From the purely, and I think that links a bit to the discussion, the question just before as well. From a purely standardization perspective, we, rather than locking in, so developing something just for Europe, that's where we try to work together with our counterparts from other countries. Because once you have comparable system, once you have the same baseline that you agree on across Europe, US, it's a lot easier to then develop on top of that and then follow procurement, follow service provision, whichever points come in, rather than lock in, and then it becomes one versus the other. And then it becomes a market competition tool.
Yeah, maybe to explain it as well. I think it's more an economical decision then. What was been doing in the United States and Chinese on all the exports increases as such. So if that will be a decision, it will be more on based on economics or on even warfare in the future. If it's AI very, very important, then it's on regulation or industry.
Cyber as well. So.
Do you have some ongoing conversation right now inside the institution to just, is there some political conversation to stop using US and infrastructure software right now, or is it no conversation?
It's not a conversation we would have from a standardization perspective. So
Part of the challenge of the voice that says, of the view that says, let's stop using all of that, is that it needs also to state exactly with what we're going to replace it with, and that cannot be carrier pigeons. So, quick question, to make sure that we capture also what's inside the Q&A from the online, and actually fits very well to the conversation we're just having. Where does open source software fit into the foreign versus the EU software model? And I say that because there are several questions open source. In the end, they all boil down to the same: open source versus US proprietary software, open source, OpenStack, for example. And there are some questions about EUCS that this is not the right audience, because we need to have someone from either ENISA or from the Commission to talk to us about EUCS. So question to the panel. Open source fit, software fit to the foreign proprietary?
If you look at it, well, if we can do as much as possible with open source, I think it's a good goal to strive. But in the end, I think there's a lot closed software, closed source software that's better, or better fitting the business that we serve. So it will be a mix and match in the end, I believe. So yeah, it's nice to have a open source first strategy, maybe, but we have to be realistic about the other goals that we have to move forward, to have the best solution.
Well, I would like to put it this way. If you have a car and your brakes are open source and you have an accident, and they say, well, there is a little bug in the brakes, sorry about that, we fix it. So nobody is really responsible for that. So there is probably sort of place where you need someone have the responsibility. And You don't need open source everywhere. I mean, in the software, when you have a stack and it works and it's closed and you can use another stack, there is no need if the one stack is open source, if the other one is closed source. If you do the same, it's fine until you got a real world problem that you can't fix. But if you can change to another stack, it's okay. So what you should see or what you should think about in your strategy is, am I locked in somewhere? How hard is it for me if I'm locked in? Is this a risk I can manage, or is it something I have to think about?
Yeah, I agree totally on my colleague.
So I don't think anyone. So to react to the question online, I don't think anyone disputes the value of open source or the role that it has. Even we use open source software systematically. It's all about managing the dependency and where it fits right. Because with the open source, again, you exchange different risks than proprietary and different dependencies. That's what it boils down to. On that happy thought, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our great panel. Thank you very much.